Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Peter. Maybe I could just start introducing the next panelist. With me, I have Cindy Koubey. Hi, Cindy. I think you're on mute. That one. Hi, Cindy.
Hi.
Hey, how you doing? I hope everything is well with you.
Yeah, everything is okay here. Thank you so much for
Perfect.
having me.
Great, thank you. Maybe we could just start with a short introduction about you, Cindy.
My name is Cindy Kobe, and I'm the chairperson of the Big Youth Council. And I'm also working with the International Alliance of Indigenous and Tribal Peoples of the Tropical Forest,
Okay,
which is a network.
just sorry for interrupting you, Cindy. I think the volume of your mic is a little bit low. It's a little bit difficult hearing you, unfortunately.
Oh, let me try using the.
Yeah, what we can do is maybe we can jump to Michael for now, and then we can go back to you in like a minute. Is
Oh,
that okay? Perfect.
yeah, that's
So,
fine.
oh, no, you know what? We can actually hear you perfect now. Maybe we just jump into it. So, Cindy, could you do a short introduction about tell the audience a little bit?
Yeah, my name is Cindy Kobe from Kenya, and I'm the chair of the Ogek Youth Council, and I'm also working as the program officer at the International Alliance of Indigenous and Tribal Peoples of the Tropical Forest. And I mostly work with indigenous people, indigenous youth in matters environment, conservation, and land and resources. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us, Cindy. Great to have you here. And then the final panelist, I have the pleasure of introducing Michael Nganga. Hi, Michael. How you doing?
Good. So I'm Michael Nganga, or Yaki, depending on the name you know me with. And I'm from Miti Alliance in Kenya. And our work really is focusing on planting and growing of trees in schools, in communities, and reforesting areas. So behind me, I chose this background because this is where I'm doing my small garden forest. And our work really also revolves around educating people on why biodiversity, why grow trees, why is it important? And that's why we focus in schools, because we want to nurture the young minds from an early age. So that's Miti Alliance, and that's Michael. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. And beautiful background. Truly, it really fits the discussion also. So let me just jump into it, and maybe I could start with you, Peter. When you look at biodiversity sector in Africa, and a little bit like I said before, it's extremely rich, right? But it's also certain trends happening, both with agriculture expanding, urbanization, and certain things. How do you look at the current status of biodiversity in Africa, and what do you see as some of the biggest challenges?
Well, first of all, when you look at biodiversity, it's quite diverse. When you look with the complexity of the issues and the richness of the resource, I think the one thing that is happening right now is we are understanding that we have this heritage and this resource. We are trying to understand what it means to us. And when we understand that, then we'll protect it. But the problem is in that process of understanding, a lot of pillaging is happening. And so the lack of understanding and the lack of connection to our heritage and to the richness of our resource is allowing us to get our resources being taken away or to be misused or being destroyed. When I look at something like agriculture and the practices that we used to have as a continent, as a region, as a country, and then people came and said, oh, let's increase the yield. Let's make sure we can plant during dry season. Let's make sure this and this. And they brought all these chemicals and everything. And then they woke up one day and said, oh no, what you were doing before was actually the right way. Organic farming was actually the right way. And no one is apologizing to our farmers and saying we were wrong and you were right. And so I feel there's a lot of injustice when it comes to our biodiversity across the board, but it's a lack of understanding, a loss of connection to this diverse, beautiful richness. And the thing is, I can tell you, when you look at how that understanding is affecting the protection, you will then realize that what everyone is doing here, from Michael to Cindy and to myself, the awareness and the connection and the information sharing and the intergenerational exchange is so important for our generation and the generations to come to actually understand what we have and why we need to protect it. So I think we're at a very interesting place right now.
Thank you so much for that. I think you are, spot on. as part of it. And also the aspect that nobody has actually apologized for the farmers of kind of misinforming them in a way, and also in a way of misinforming them, bringing in these practices that is not sustainable or actually not helping either them, society, or the environment. Thank you for that. Maybe we can jump on to Cindy as part of understanding, what do you see as the biggest challenges within biodiversity in Africa?
Thank you so much for your question. And if you allow, I'll speak from an indigenous perspective on the biodiversity. Indigenous people, they live in 24% of the world's total land, and biodiversity is in their territories right now. And in terms of biodiversity, right now they're not. What they're lacking is granting the indigenous people permission to. Permission to protect their biodiversity. What they're doing is chasing the indigenous people out of their lands and their territories, and yet these indigenous peoples have the traditional knowledge and capacity to protect this land. And unfortunately, in Africa, that's what we're lacking. And recently, in Central African Republic, they've been killing pygmies in Kenya. They've been doing the same to the Gay people. They've been doing the same to the Ndorois people, and many more. The list is endless. And unfortunately, this has led to degradation of land. It has led to climate change because when other communities enter into for example, forest, they cut the trees, which leads to agriculture. Agriculture is another big challenge to Africans because, as Peter Moll said, they're not organic farmers. They're using pesticides. These pesticides, they later destroy the species in the soil, the species, the food that the animals eat, for example, cows. And this has led to a lot of things. It leads one thing leads to the other. From evictions leads to biodiversity loss, which later leads to food insecurity. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for that. I think that's a very good input. Maybe we move on to you, Michael. What do you look at being some of the big challenges in the biodiversity sector in Africa?
Thank you, Jonas. And I want to build from what Peter and Cindy have mentioned, and especially on the indigenous aspect. There's so much we are to pride ourselves with here in Africa, in terms of the early man, in terms of our medicine practices, in terms of all the things that we used to do. And for us, the point I can build on from Peter's comments is the education part is what we see has been lacking. An empowered community, an empowered society is really able to make certain decisions. And they should decide for themselves and say that we are not going to cut down this forest. It's an indigenous forest. That's where we get our medicine. So right now, what we as Meteor Alliance have been focusing on is the training. Because for like 7 years, I was a club member and I was active in planting of trees. Then I discovered that we are not getting more and more people taking up the practice. So you're not getting more and more environmentalists coming to help. But what you're just getting is people who want to come, plant a few trees, and it's on Twitter, it's on Instagram, it's whatever. But let's now go deeper into the know-how, into the knowledge and understanding. Why am I planting a neem tree? Why am I planting an acacia tree? Because an acacia will help the birds. It's a habitat. It will also help the bees because the bees help to pollinate our food and the bees give us honey. So we must now go a bit further, not just planting, but also growing. But now what are we growing? We're growing a diverse kind of forest. We are growing different kind of trees. Because what has happened, and I think Cindy alluded to that, is we got all these trees that came from wherever. You know, we got grevillea, cypress. Were those our indigenous trees? No. But what is everybody planting? They're planting the exotic trees. Yes, they are great for cover, but the trees that do well here, we are not growing those. So right now, what I feel really is a big thing that we must work on as people who are advocating for this is empowering the people with the information. And that's why we are going into the schools, because these kids are in the formative stages. So I think that's where we have started from. And right now we are right at our training center, and there's about 40 people being taught about regenerative agriculture, organic farming, permaculture, and we are showing them how to do that in a space of a quarter acre. So these are some of the things that we really want to make practical, and especially reaching the mothers and the families and communities. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Michael, and extremely relevant. My next question is for Peter, for Peter Moll. As part of looking at, opportunities in terms of, preserving biodiversity, or even expanding on the biodiversity, right? Not only restoring, but actually going even further. What kind of opportunities do you see in making this happen?
Well, one thing that I believe when it comes to biodiversity, a huge issue is land. And even when it comes to tree planting and tree growing, a lot of the land that is available is the educational institutions' land. And that's, you're trying to utilize the schools, primary schools, high schools, universities, etc. But there needs to be land allocation, and there needs to be transparency in that land allocation. Because within KFS and within the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, and within all management authorities of forest, there is land allocated for expansion. There is land allocated for ensure our water towers are maintained. There is land allocated in terms of restoration. But the transparency, the information is not available. So you have all these youth groups who are looking to plant trees, to grow trees, to have tree nurseries, but the information is not there for them. Actually, when it comes even to tree nurseries, KFS is supposed to be actually empowering youth to have tree nurseries, guiding them, training them. But again, information and lack of transparency when it comes to the land allocated for expanding and restoring. But I think also when it comes to this issue of restoration, mitigation, protection, etc., we have to look at the priorities of a community, the priorities of a county, the priorities of a city, and how do you make it a priority? Again, awareness, education, advocacy, policy, and ensuring that when it comes to what we're doing, when it comes to land development, when it comes to infrastructure, we need to ensure that the policies, the strategies, and the people are informed. And so even when it comes to developed nations investing in infrastructure in Africa, when they're investing, do they allow us to just sign off to cut down all the trees on a highway? Or do they say, no, we're going to put in a clause to respect biodiversity? We're going to put in a clause that says we need to restore the biodiversity after we go through. So who is to hold the blame? Is it the one who is getting benefits from the infrastructure, or is it the one funding the infrastructure? So we can't blame anyone. We just need someone to be strong enough, brave enough, and courageous enough to change the status quo and to do what needs to be done.
Thank you so much for that, Peter. I see that Michael is nodding a lot here. Michael, it feels like you want to jump into that. Feel free.
Yeah, I like what Peter said, because land is such a big issue, and there's such an expanse of land across Kenya. But you tell me, as a young person, and I'm sure Peter has faced this, and Cindy is facing the same, is that when the long rains are here, everybody's asking us, where can we come and plant? Where can we come and plant? So you tell them, okay, let's go to these schools. And then now you went to that school, but you're not able to come from Nairobi and go to Kitale because, hey, the cost to that. Again, another point is the nurseries. Kenya has said that we're going to plant 1.8 billion trees. So how are we going to do that when our nurseries don't actually have that number of seedlings? It's in empowering the youth, the women groups, the CBOs, and such. And over time, I think the additional point I can add is that we need sustainable forests. Look at Canada as an example. I think they did $30 billion last year in wood products. Now look at Kenya. We have the logging ban, yes, but are we now setting aside some land where we're going to do our own forestry, where we're going to grow our trees for the demand for, building for our homes? What's the big four agenda called? The one on building, is it, can't remember, it's gone off my mind, but one of the, yeah, affordable housing. So all those affordable houses, they need some wood, they need some drawers, they need some doors. So where are the people going to get their wood? In the forests or in the plantations? How can these plantations support a population over 40 something million? No, they can't. But we're looking at examples of other countries that are progressive in these things. They have set aside land that is going to be used for, sustainable forestry. Another thing, families are still using wood for cooking. Schools, I've been to so many schools and I find a school and they tell me, we needed firewood. We don't have money to buy. So we cut down this tree, and they cut like a 30-year-old croton tree. And you almost cringe and you're like, the lack of resources, the lack of knowledge, the lack of understanding on why such things are still happening is because there's certain level of poverty, even of information and access to that information. So we just have, I just feel for myself, for Cindy, for Peter, and everybody else who's in this field, because it's a constant battle. I wish I was president, I'd just allocate some land in a whole county and say, this county will be providing sustainable wood for the whole of the rest of the other counties. And forests are keep-off zones. But anyway, that's in a perfect world. So we just keep pushing. Yeah.
But I really like that suggestion, and I don't see why it should be so difficult, because like you're saying, cutting down a 30-year-old tree because you need some firewood. I mean, is that what you want? Same thing goes with the indigenous trees, and also like, the role they play in the ecosystem. So the aspect around sustainable forestry for the timber sector, that can be organized. Like you said, you can actually create a forest and then grow those specific trees for that specific purpose, and then maybe not the ecosystem thinking, but like you said, keep the rest untouched. Yeah. Because the natural balance is depending on it, climate change, I mean everything. So I 100% agree with you there. Cindy, just to ask you on this, and specifically around a lot of the challenges that you're seeing in terms of biodiversity, you mentioned indigenous groups also being affected by this, like the pygmies and so on. But what's your take around biggest opportunities around this sector, and what could be done to kind of turn the tide on this?
The biggest to curb this the issue of pygmies and all the other indigenous communities is access to indigenous lands and territories. Let the indigenous people live in their land, live in their forest, live in where the place where they call home. And also this also can be done with the help of governments. Governments are also they're not fully there yet, but we're hoping that one day in the near future they'll be able to grant access to the indigenous land. And also something else is investing in nature-based solutions. These nature-based solutions are all indigenous. Indigenous, they have the traditional knowledge that will be able to curb this biodiversity loss. For example, as Michael mentioned, beekeeping. Beekeeping is practiced by most hunter-gatherers communities, and this also leads to a lot of good things like food security. And governments and all other relevant partners should invest in nature-based solutions. This will also help curb climate change, biodiversity loss. In Africa, the government should also include biodiversity, as it should be a priority area in terms of creating development plans and and also corporate programs all over. Yeah.
I hear you. Thank you so much for that, Cindy, and also the input shared by Michael and Peter Moll. Let me ask you a different question. So, from a taxpayer perspective in Norway, far away from here, a big ambition is restoring biodiversity, fighting climate change, and all of that. So a lot of the funding going from Norway specifically towards biodiversity in geographical areas like Africa, that's a high priority. So there should be funding, should be resources available to kind of battle these changes and the scenarios that you're describing. How would you use this funding as part of battling this challenge? What's the most optimal way to use this funding if the ambition is to preserving biodiversity? That's my question. Maybe we can start with you, Peter, and then you can explain on this is what I would allocate funding on to preserve biodiversity. Feel free.
What a beautiful and interesting question. I think when it comes to resource allocation, number one is accessibility. So the problem that I've experienced as a youth, as a CEO, as a person on a board, is that the funding that is available is not accessible. And I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but there's a lot of funding that comes into Africa, into East Africa, into Kenya, but it's not accessible. It's not accessible to the change makers on the ground. It's not accessible to those who are doing such meaningful work. And I don't understand why. I don't know whether it is gatekeepers. I don't know whether it is a policy issue. I don't know whether it's simply a lack of empathy and Ubuntu and understanding of the need to have a collaborative, cohesive, cross-cutting approach to solve these issues. So number one is that there needs to be better accessibility to available funding. Number two, I think ensuring that we have strategic approaches when it comes to water towers, when it comes to tree nurseries, and when it comes to restoration. So when it comes to tree nurseries, actually in Kenya, there's a short supply of seedlings. Actually, if Kenya wanted to actually do what they're saying when it comes to the 10% tree cover, and we had all the money to do it, we wouldn't have the seedlings. So there's a short supply of seedlings in this country, and so we need to increase the tree nurseries of the country. And there are many youth groups. Actually, the USAID and US Embassy did a research, and there's about 18,000 youth groups in this country, if not more. These groups can be empowered, trained, given equipment, given tools, given the resources to have tree nurseries. And then organizations like Meteor Alliance, SUSO, etc. can be there to supervise and to help them when they're managing their tree nursery. And so the more tree nurseries, the more employment, the more seedlings, the more available seedlings to be planted. So that's my second point. And when it comes to the seedlings, the tree nurseries, and the availability, the last point when it comes to the funding, I think is when we talk about the benefit sharing, right? Benefit sharing for me is one of the biggest issues and bones of contentions when it comes to this industry. Many people don't think they benefit from it. Many people don't know how they benefit. Many people don't benefit. If there's a way that funding can be strategically placed to ensure, one, someone knows how they can benefit and how they are benefiting from biodiversity and from nature in general. Number two, to increase the benefits of this sector to ensure that there is some sort of motivation, incentive, and that sort of willingness from the community and from the youth in general to actually want to be part of it. And last but not least, when it comes to benefit sharing, it's kind of like a mindset shift. If I benefit, if you benefit, it becomes a community ownership. It becomes something that I will own, and when I own something, I will protect it. So I lost my second point, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much for that, Peter. I think that's a very good answer that you came with. If I understand you correctly, what you're saying is there's over 18,000 youth groups that want to plant trees, that wants to get activated, wants to get engaged, but funding is not reaching it. And that countries like Norway or taxpayer money being sent from Norway specifically to empower these groups to plant trees, that's not happening. Money is not reaching organizations like yours. Michael, do you agree with this? Is this how you perceive this also, or what's your take on this?
It's such a wonderful question, because I don't know, we'll just seem like we're reading from the same script with Peter, because as a nursery, I don't think we have ever received funding from a local or local donor other than international. And maybe you get one that believes in your dream and sees where you're going. And this is for the proactive ones like Meteor Alliance, who will reach out to someone you know who's working in Sweden or somewhere else in the globe. But as Peter mentioned, I'm telling you, I go down to the counties and I always want to work with the local nurseries. And they grapple with, they have no resources. They contribute money so that they try and increase capacity of their nurseries, but it is not possible. Yet we are saying we are trying to raise 1.8 billion seedlings to do the 10%. And for the longest time, we've been asking, like as Meteor Alliance, what would we do if we got really some funding to scale our efforts? What we would do is, number one, is multiply our efforts in every county and establish a center of excellence where people get trained on how to set up their nursery, how to grow food sustainably, how to understand biodiversity and what trees to plant where and why, how to understand indigenous knowledge, as Cindy mentioned, on how we should start appreciating our indigenous people. How to start appreciating that certain trees were used in certain season in this way and that way, because it has ceased just being that we are growing tree seedlings and we go to a place and we have an activity and we do it. But I'll tell you the truth, as in, I've been writing proposals, and it's not that I don't know how to write one. And as Peter mentioned, the funds are inaccessible. Just yesterday or the day before, I wrote to someone and they told me, do you have capacity to provide, the carbon certificate? As in, to get carbon certification to offer, the carbon market, you need to have been certified. And that's, I don't know if it was $10,000 or $20,000. So as in, will I start racing after certification, or will I continue with my planting and growing of trees in 30 schools per year for the next 5 years? Or I'll kill myself looking for such kind of funding. So, you hear of this country has donated this. It goes to the large organizations. They will do the reports. They will do the fantastic reports. We'll see them. They will do even a fantastic video. We will see that on YouTube. But are we really going to the small tree nursery in Bomet and supporting them, because they will support the community and they will support their family? Or a women's group that has 20 ladies who are doing bamboo and they are also impacting their household. As in, there's just this barrier, and Peter called them gatekeepers, but I feel like it is a gatekeeper with a sword or with a gun, whereby, even if you tell this to someone who really understands, who really knows and sees these things, they still don't get it. You will still not access the kind of funding you want. the bigger picture of where we are going as Meteor Alliance is that one day we access from $1 million to do a big, large-scale, biodiverse piece of land where people come learn about so many species, the species that cut across this whole country.
Mm.
They will spend a night there. They will have fun there. They will, come every season to plant trees, and they will look at trees in a different way, and they will go back to their homes and their rural homes and do something fantastic.
Yeah.
But right now, $1 million is a dream.
Yeah. No, I hear you, and it's a very sad reality that I'm hearing from you as part of what it looks like, and it's the same thing as Peter Moll has confirmed, that funding is specifically allocated to support organizations like you, and I think it would be like a wet dream for everybody in that's like part of the taxpayer system, wanting to contribute to positive impact in biodiversity, and just hearing that youth organization that wants to plant trees and wants to take this one actually don't get any resources, even though resources are being sent. And like you said, it's coming back in terms of stories and stuff, but we need to be more real. This is not about storytelling. This is about reality and preserving nature. So we should have higher standard than just storytelling. Cindy, moving to you, what's your thoughts on this? Do you share the perspective around funding and some of the things that Michael was saying, that it's not only a gatekeeper, it's actually like more like a gatekeeper with a sword or a gun. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I totally agree with Michael and Peter Moll. Funding it's there, but it's inaccessible, especially for grassroots organizations that are based in grassroots areas like in Narok, in the deep forest, like in the deepest parts of Kenya or other countries. And if I was a donor, I would invest in civic education. I'd fund matters of educating people on the importance of biodiversity, importance of planting trees, importance of um, of supporting groups, youth groups. The youth groups have a lot of ideas. They're practicing a lot of good activities. For example, they're beekeepers. They're practicing the old ways of beekeeping, which increases a supply of honey. And if I was a donor, I would also prioritize biodiversity as a key sector. Funding is there, but they go to other areas such as health, education, which they also deserve an equal attention. But I think biodiversity has been left out, and it should all be inclusive. Like the list should be equal. Let's say 20% biodiversity, 20% education, 20% healthcare. They should recognize that it's also an important part. And if we don't, the effects they'll show up in the future. In 10 years, we'll just realize that there are no more elephants. There are no more specific indigenous trees. The honey it's not as sweet as before. And yeah.
No, I hear you. To be honest, I think as it is now, biodiversity is actually a priority, and that they are trying to get money sent to local organizations. The problem is that it's not reaching through. So there's an improvement work to be done, because if you look at development strategy and many of these things, biodiversity has been on the agenda for a long time. But I think what it comes down to is, where do you allocate this funding, and are you making sure that it's a trickle-down effect? And from what I'm hearing from you, it doesn't seem to be any trickle-down effect, which is very sad. Maybe I see now that time has run out. Unfortunately, this is we should have had twice as much time for this discussion alone. To be honest, I think it's been fantastic. But could we have maybe a final note, maybe from starting off with Peter, as part of people that wants to support biodiversity in Africa and are living abroad somewhere and are sending money, and but not realizing what is happening or how you are viewing it, being one of the organizations they want to support. What is it that you want to tell them? Is there a message where you want to be like, this is what you need to do? Yes.
All right. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And Michael and Cindy, you're amazing, and I look forward to finding ways to work closer together because Ubuntu and collaboration is key. And Jonas, thank you so much for your time and for this opportunity to have this unique conversation. I think there's two things I want to say. Number one is about biodiversity. Donors and development partners need to look at biodiversity as a holistic thing. They need to look at biodiversity interlinked to almost everything, interlinked to tourism, interlinked to our GDP, interlinked to our health, interlinked to our mental health and physical health, interlinked to our livelihoods, interlinked to our prosperity, our heritage. I think it needs to be looked at something that you're investing in that is cross-cutting. So if you want to be, if you have money for health and the health industry and the health sector, you can invest in biodiversity because it's directly interlinked. If you want to do job opportunities and livelihoods, you can invest in biodiversity because it's interlinked. If you want to talk about environmental conservation and tree growing and restoration, biodiversity. So I want development partners and donors to look at biodiversity really holistically and understand the depths of it and not just think of it as a streamline, a straightforward thing. It's not black and white. It's quite gray and very deep. Number two is obviously I advocate for youth very deeply. And even within communities, youth are the majority. Within Kenya, within Africa, youth are the majority. Donors and development partners need to put clauses. And it's those clauses that allow the government or whoever they're giving their money to open the doors for youth and to open the doors for opportunities. The clause that says 30% of this funding has to go to youth groups, or 30% of this funding has to go to youth-serving organizations, or 50% of this funding needs to be involved with youth employment, etc. And these clauses is what bind the member states, bind the NGO, bind whoever it is that's getting the money. We need to be deliberate, so deliberate and meaningful with our resources that we are given, so deliberate and meaningful with our taxes, and we need to understand what it means. I want us to understand that our future is not promised, and we're now fighting for our lives. And I don't want to sound dramatic, but tomorrow, you have a dream, I have a dream, so let's secure tomorrow so that our dreams have a place to exist. And that's how donors need to look at it, that we're trying to secure the future by having meaningful investment, meaningful donation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Amen, brother. Michael, is there something you would like to add to this? And unfortunately, because we're running out of time, it would be great if you could shorten it a little bit. Thank you, Michael.
Well, Peter said it for us. So we only have to go to point 3 is I'd tell the donors everything that Peter has said. But on the third point is, can you verify your donations have reached the right people? Can you come down to where you're sending your donations? It's become so easy to just send donations because it's easy, but you're just sending to another bank account. What are the administration costs? You know, where is the money going? And as Peter mentioned, there's so many youth, so many women groups, there's so many people out there that are doing some work. And those are the people they should be supporting. So the world, we are all benefiting from this world. So let's really work together. You have something that I need, and we are doing something that we need help, and we are asking for that help. So I just say that and everything else that Peter said, and yeah, put it in a bucket and also add Cindy's as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Michael. Moving on to you, Cindy. Closing remark. What would you like to say?
I'd encourage everyone, not only donors, but everyone to go the nature way, the nature-based solution way. And also, I also encourage them to go to the grassroots organizations in next to the forest, organizations that are, for example, there are very many women groups in Narok, and they have a lot of trees. With them all, we can get in touch. But the youth groups and the women groups, they're not getting funding for this. So they need to go in the grassroots, in the village, next to the trees, next to the home, next to biodiversity. And thank you so much for having me.
Perfect. Thank you. I think this has been amazing. And honestly, I have many more questions. I feel like I haven't even gone through half of it, but it's been an amazing discussion. I really appreciate all your input, all your thoughts, sharing. Our job and mission at Taxpayer Impact is to bring this forward. So we are working closely with politicians. We will also be educating the Norwegian taxpayers around what is happening or not. And trust me, everything that you've been saying, we will be educating because this is, for me, it's so sad. The fact that there are organizations ready to deal with these problems, but not getting funding. So let's fix that. That's my commitment to you. For everybody watching live, thank you so much for following us on Facebook Live and on YouTube Live. We also have a survey and a poll that we're doing. So for everybody watching this on biodiversity, if you would like to share your own thoughts around, where you see opportunities or challenges, feel free to do so. For now, I would like to thank the amazing panelists. Thank you, Cindy, Michael, and Peter. Have a beautiful weekend.
Thank you.
Yes. That was a little bit.